Now, we asked Lisa Rogers to appear on our show tonight. She told us she's not making any more comments about the issue. The Office of Civil Rights has made a visit to the South Carolina School for the Deaf and Blind, and the results of its investigation should be known sometime this month. Now we're back with our panel to talk about the issue of parental rights. Mary, let me start with you. Why does the deaf community see this as an issue of freedom of choice?
Basically, it's because Lisa Rogers is speaking on behalf of the deaf students and the deaf community. She does not have the authority to do that. She's not an educator. She's not involved with us. Cheryl, I don't know if you want to add some more. Yes, we, the deaf community, had no idea that Lisa Rogers was speaking for the deaf community and for the students, for the people across South Carolina, and we felt that we had the right to make a choice, and also the parents, for their own children.
This is, I think we all remember all the protests that really took to the street as far as like Gallaudet was concerned, when the deaf community, I think, felt that the hearing world was trying to speak for them. This issue, in a sense, really sparked a public protest that we saw on the screen earlier. Why does or what really brought the deaf community together on this issue?
I think that we, the deaf community, are tired of hearing people or this so-and-so person taking over, running our life, and trying to help us. We feel that we can do for ourselves. In the 1980s, we're in the 1990s now, and it seems kind of silly. We can make decisions.
When we look at the complaint itself, though, at the issue is parents' choice as far as education, and I think the quality of education that perhaps some people feel that handicapped students or deaf children can receive. And it brings to the forefront the very controversial issue of mainstreaming versus a residential school for, say, a deaf person. And I know, Wanda, that's something that you faced with your son. How did you face this issue?
Well, we tried public school with our son. We started back when he was about 2.5 years old. And unfortunately, public school simply does not offer what is needed for a profoundly deaf child. It's possible that some children who are just hard of hearing, have some loss, can be served adequately in the larger districts. However, in the rural areas of South Carolina, there is just not adequate services to provide what a deaf child needs. We tried public school for the 1st and 2nd grade and watched our son become inhibited and shy and afraid of failure. It was a nice babysitting service, but we wanted our son to be in school to be taught so that he could learn and could progress and become a natural, happy, healthy, well-adjusted person. And it wasn't happening in public school.
What do you think this, I guess, complaint has on the tape? We heard you say that the implications are really what, in a sense, is very dangerous here to people that are very involved in the deaf community and education.
Absolutely. And the complaint, I think, was brought without proper research and certainly without forethought on what can happen to a deaf child when it's placed in public school. Without adequate services, socially they become isolated. Naturally, they're educationally isolated, and most often, if they have an adequate interpreter, that's the only friend they have. The children very infrequently become well-adjusted and happy in public school. If this action is actually followed through and there is some action taken against the school, I think that we will see many, many unhappy deaf adults out in the world in the state of South Carolina because they're poorly prepared for life as an adult because their educational experience was not what it should have been.
How about the issue that the federal government says we're supposed to put a deaf student in the least restrictive environment? How does that legal definition clash sometimes with the needs of a special student or a deaf student?
Often the problem is that people don't realize that communication is really, when we talk about the least restrictive environment, in public schools, the teacher, you know, the interpreter, the students with them all the time, as Wanda just mentioned. And that's a very restricted access to communication and so forth. So often in the public view, the least restrictive environment is public school close to the parents, when in reality, the deaf child enjoys the interaction and the friendship, the communication, the ability to talk with anyone. If there's anything you want to add, Cheryl? Wanda?
Yes, I experienced that myself when I had prepared for a very shocking and sad experience of joining the program at the South Carolina School for the Deaf. We live about a 2-hour drive, and I took this 7-year-old boy expecting this grief-stricken child not wanting to be separated from his mother, only to find upon arrival at the school the very first day, he had a kinship with the other children there. He was so happy and said, "Gosh, Mama, everybody hears signs. I want to stay here." And I had really sort of hoped he'd want to go home with me. But I found out how restricted he had been feeling in public school. And coming home to South Carolina School for the Deaf and Blind was just that. It was coming home. He was with his people, deaf people, that he could talk with about anything that came to mind. Communication was not a barrier there, and it was a great experience. And we've been very happy with it for 8 years.
Okay, well, we've got a caller standing by on the telephone line. Let's go to the phone lines. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
This question kind of relates to your educational question, but it takes it maybe a step further. You're talking about educational barriers. You also have a lot of barriers, perhaps like architectural barriers. And most often we think in terms of disabled people being in wheelchairs or something, but I imagine there are a lot of things that you see when you enter buildings that are maybe perhaps you feel discriminated against. And I'd like to know what those are, and are things getting better in with the advent of the ADA?
Yes. You know, there are architectural barriers for deaf persons in many kinds of buildings. Many buildings don't have TDDs ready and available. That's right. They don't have captions on the television to tell people what's going on in the building. There are hearing people who can listen to announcements and things that are being said. The deaf person has no idea what's being said, so those are barriers.
Okay.
Is there anything you can think of? Really, those two are the big issues, the most important things.
And that's what the federal government is looking at right now, or with its recently passed law. We also have a caller now from our deaf community. Go ahead, please. Ms. Biggers, would you like to relay that call to us, please?
Hi, my name is Keith Baker. I'm deaf. I went to both public school and school for the deaf. I feel it is basic right for parents to decide where their child goes to school. Why does the Office of Civil Rights allow an individual who is not a parent to file a complaint?
I would like to know the answer to that also.
I too would like to know that. For me as a parent, the right to choose was like salvation. Everyone should have the right to choose. If I were forced to have my son in public school, we would be suffering as a family, he would be suffering as an individual, and none of us have really been able to determine why this action was taken. We're curious ourselves.
An issue I guess we haven't touched upon that's very critical here is the whole culture of the deaf community. How important is that to a child? And can a child obtain that same type of, I guess, feeling of togetherness or closeness in a program in a public school? Again, that's very controversial, I know.
Yeah, but I'm very profoundly deaf myself, and I know how important it is, how close kind of deaf people are together. Even though some of the deaf people may be from another state, when they move to South Carolina, they bond. There's a relationship there that's very natural. And I think that most of us grew up going to the residential school for the deaf, and we lived together more than we lived at home. So really that became our home. We socialized, we communicated, we could all sign together. We went home, it really wasn't the same. We love our mom and dad just as children, sure, but in our hearts, we're deaf people. We stay together, we're always together. And it's a very deep feeling of kinship that we have in the deaf world. And that's one of the deaf parts of deaf culture. That's very natural. You know, if a hearing child, you know, if a deaf child goes to the mainstream school, they feel very isolated. They can't socialize with people. Then they come to the deaf school, and really they pick it up very quickly, and they become right involved with the deaf community. As Wanda was explaining about her son, his behavior is very, very typical across the deaf community. For deaf children, that's a very natural way to behave.
Well, how about you, Mary, your own experiences as a teacher? You're right there on the front lines every day with young students.
I feel really they just make a great deal of progress. Everything is there. We have access to everything. It's not only the education, but the physical, the social, the emotional growth. Those really are things that count the most. And you've got to remember that most of our students, most of our learning goes outside the classroom. 70% of what we learn happens outside the classroom through various activities. In the classroom, we're only eight hours a day. But outside of the classroom, many things happen, and that's where we learn about life after school. So, you know, that's how I feel about the issue.
Okay, well, the issue of parents' rights, that's something that we're talking about tonight. Again, we hope that you'll call in with any questions or comments that you might have about the issue of freedom of choice and parents' rights. For our deaf community, that number is 578-6957 or 1578-6957 if you're out of the Spartanburg area. And for others at home, that number is 599-0201 or our toll-free number, which is 1-800-763-0405. We'll be back right after this. Well, we're back here tonight to talk about the issue of freedom of choice and the issue of parents having the right to decide their education for deaf children. We've got more phone calls on the line, so let's go ahead and see what some of our viewing audience has to say. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Okay, my name is Susan Gray, and I am an individual that had some hearing growing up, had progressive hearing loss. And what I want to say is that even though I could hear when I was in public school, I missed so much of what was going on in school. I would come in one day and find out I had a math test, had no idea there was a math test because I misunderstood the teacher. The teacher would turn their back to the classroom. I had no understanding of what was going on. There'd be class discussion. I could not participate in class discussions because I would not understand what was being said. We would play games out at recess, and I would not understand. And I just don't understand how Lisa Rogers can feel that just because a person has some hearing, that makes that child function in a classroom as a hearing child, because it is not possible.
Did your school district provide special services for you?
I had speech therapy, and that was it.
Okay. I guess that's something that parents are faced with in so many ways, Wanda.
That's right. We had to seek out special services on our own most of the time. Some special services were provided by the local school district. However, it was painfully inadequate. We'd had no interpreter in the classroom. The teacher who taught my son in the early part of his education in preschool and those programs didn't sign at all. And then the teacher who taught him an itinerant program the first 2 years of school had some signing skills. But he was only in that special contained classroom for about 2.5 hours a day. And then he was put in the regular classroom and really just colored and sat in the teacher's lap because he was a very attractive child and it seemed like a good thing to do, just keep him happy. But he wasn't learning. And that's what education is all about, learning.
So you had, in a sense, the very same situation
our
caller did in that way.
Absolutely.
We've got another caller on the line. Let's go to the phones. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, my name is Lisa Womack, and I have a 6-year-old deaf child that goes to deaf and blind school. And I would just like to say that I'm real pleased with the education that he's getting, and that I don't feel that Lisa Rogers has the right, or anybody that don't have a deaf child has the right to say what we should do with our children.
Okay, well, we thank you for calling in. That sort of, I guess, brings to the surface here another issue. The federal government, what was it, 10 years ago, said, as far as the disabilities are concerned. I think it's called now the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that mandates the least restrictive environment for children with disabilities. Is it fair for a student not to be mainstreamed into a public school if he has been tested and shown that he has the abilities for it not to be?
I think that's an individual choice. I know many parents who have children that are in mainstream programs and they're happy with that, and that's fine. But if we're not happy with that, we should be allowed the right to choose. I can tell you right now there's absolutely no way my son would return to public school. I think even if the law said he had to, we'd try to find a way out because he's so happy in the residential program. He's so involved in other activities. I can't imagine moving him back to what would be considered the least restrictive environment in the minds of those who feel that way. But my individual choice and my own view of the situation involving my son, of which I'm very familiar with everything going on in his educational placement, is that he's in the least restrictive environment and he certainly is functioning well there. To have him in a mainstream program would be terrible for him. Some hard of hearing children, maybe, but I think it's an individual choice and each family has to work that out for themselves with their local school district.
Okay, well, let's go to the phone lines again. We have another caller. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, ma'am. This is Barbara Boggs, and I'm calling in favor of what is being discussed at this moment. I have had some relationships with deaf individuals who have been mainstreamed and have had to go through those types of programs. And what I have seen are results of frustration, disappointment, discouragement. All of those are involved in that type of setting. And I feel that a parent's right should be able to choose where their child wants to go to school and what they feel is best in the best interest of that child. I don't think that one person should have the right of telling a parent where that child should go. I just don't feel like a person should have their opinion forced on parents as in that choice. And I have 3 children who are hearing, and I would not want the right taken away from me where my children go to school.
Okay, we thank you for calling. We also have another caller from our deaf community. Go ahead, please, Ruth, and relay that call to us, please.
Hi, this is Sherry Williams. I lived in the state of Illinois before I moved to South Carolina. There in Illinois, the parents are required to go through the local school district before the children can go to residential schools. Often the local school district would not let them go to residential schools. The parents got fed up and went to the legislature to pass a bill letting them choose which school they want to send their children. I want the state of South Carolina to retain parents' rights.
Well, I'm sure that's all of how everyone out here feels. And as she mentioned, it is an issue that is very controversial throughout the country, not here, just in South Carolina.
Yeah, I would like to say something. You know, from the perspective, of the deaf side, I know that some deaf people, are able to go to mainstream schools and do fine. But again, they're forgetting, what about the deafness, the emotional developments they're feeling inside? They're repressing things. Their mind may be making academic progress fine, but internally, their emotional growth, they may feel isolated, they may feel lost. They're just a lost person. People see them and they're deaf. They don't bother them. They leave them alone. They don't want to bother with trying to communicate with that person. And that's a problem. And also looking in the mainstreaming, the deaf child really is very, very isolated as a person. And we, the deaf community, feel that the deaf children should go to the residential school where they fit. Where, again, and this is an extremely important point, the parents themselves are able to make that choice, not other people who are able to tell them where to send their child.
And as we've said earlier, in South Carolina, parents do have that choice as of now to decide where they want their children to go to school.
And we're one of the few remaining states.
One of the few remaining states
Yes.
that do have that.
Yeah, that's right. One of very few left.
Okay, well, we have another caller, I believe, from our deaf community. Go ahead, and Ms. Biggers, if you'll relay that call to us, please.
I'm a deaf parent. I want to make a comment to say my children goes to the South Carolina School for the Deaf and Blind. I was informed of my options at my child to enter the School for the Deaf and Blind. All of my rights were explained. However, my children can best be served at the South Carolina School for the Deaf and Blind. What is basically here is that my right to choose schools is that a parent to let the parent make the choices.
Okay, well, again, she's expressing the sentiment of everyone here on the panel, and that was what was included in the complaint itself, is that maybe parents themselves were not aware of the choices that they did have as far as a school district was concerned versus a residential program.
As a parent, I can tell you that the decision is a painful one. It's a very low time in your life when you realize that you have a special child with special needs. But we were informed of our rights, both to the mainstream program and at the deaf school. Currently, we have a 5-page document that we go through on the admission of a child concerning the least restrictive environment, whether or not the residential program is right for that student. But in that process, we also have an individualized education plan where we look at each child's special needs, basically one at a time, and we evaluate whether or not the child needs speech therapy, whether or not the child needs emotional help. And all of those things are given to us. We are adequately informed. The parents who have children placed there, it would be shocking to me if any one of them said, I didn't know what my rights were.
Well, that's something I guess we'll be finding out as far as the investigation is concerned. We're supposed to be hearing something sometime this month. And so I want to thank all of you very much for being with us and explaining more why the freedom of choice is so important to the deaf community and parents and students. Thank you very much. For Open Line, I'm Libby Wallace. Good night.